Good morning and Happy New Year, and welcome to our session on digital rights and the future of work. My name is Maria Galindo, and I am Director General for Digital Nation and Urban Agenda at the Government of Catalonia. Be very welcome. We have come to our fourth and last of the digital rights live sessions from Catalonia. And through the conversations between the speakers of local and international relevance, we have had the chance to discuss around various areas of digital rights and responsibilities. With the first session, which was on digital rights and artificial intelligence, we had the opportunity to shed some light into the European Commission's proposal for a regulation on AI. The second conversation was a very rich discussion dedicated to free access to knowledge and information as a human right. And the third session was on digital rights of children and adolescents. They are digital orphans rather than digital natives. So this was one of the main takeaways. You will find the video of these past sessions posted on the series website, and I think my colleague Arnau is sharing it right now on our chat. So just to add some context, the Government of Catalonia coordinates the development of a Charter of Digital Rights and Responsibilities. It is an open innovation project, so in constant construction, to which people from a wide variety of sectors have contributed. It aims to promote a legislative and democratic framework to guarantee human rights in the digital age. So at the end of 2019, the Parliament of Catalonia expressed its widespread support to the Charter. And I think that Arnau is also sharing a link on the chat that you can check to go to the Charter and how it's being developed. So with it, we aim to contribute to the global debate on how to continue defending human rights in the digital age. The project includes proposals that can and should be addressed locally, but also highlights challenges that imply a global governance that the Government of Catalonia wants to help define from the experience of the Charter. So today's conversation will be on digital rights and the future of work. It's a very important issue that we face every day, and this is one of the specific perspectives that is being developed in the framework of the Charter of Digital Rights and Responsibilities from Catalonia. So historically, the emergence of large-scale adoption of new production technologies have evolved the organization of work and reconfigured even the social organization. So no doubt that the impact of digital technologies in the future of work is of great importance. Just a quick reminder before going to our panelists that after the discussion, we will open a Q&A space. So if you have any comments, question, thing that you would like to share with us, feel free to write them in the chat or in the QA space. You raise your hand and you will have your space. And you can write in Catalan, Spanish, even other languages. We'll do our best to translate. And our panelists will share their thoughts. So now let me introduce you to our first panelist, our first speaker, Mr. Stijn Broecke. Mr. Broecke is a senior economist at the OECD, where he leads the Future of Work initiative. He was co-editor and co-author of the OECD Employment Outlook 2019 on the future of work, and he currently heads a large research program on the impact of AI on the labor market. Mr. Broecke, thank you very much for being here today. It's a huge pleasure. Let me tell you that the Government of Catalonia has gone through these reports by the OECD in order to guide us on what to do and in terms of facing our future. So thank you so much. You may take the floor now.
Thank you very much, Maria, for the kind introduction. And I'm very glad to hear that somebody reads our reports, that we don't do this in vain. It's a real pleasure to be here. And as you said, this is such a topical issue. I read through your charter, and I can only say that I support everything that's in there. And I want to start my presentation by perhaps focusing on the sixth right that you have in this charter, which is the right to digital competence. So I really want to focus on skills for, I would say, that first half of my presentation. And then I will say a little bit about some of the other aspects of your charter as well. I'd like to have most of my presentation focus on artificial intelligence. It's what we are working on at the moment mostly, but I will try and take at some point also a broader perspective, especially when we get to the discussion, because I also work on platform workers. So, for example, we have a longitudinal survey of platform workers. In the employment outlook that you mentioned, we argued very strongly for the right to collective bargaining and other rights for platform workers. So this is something that I would be very happy to return to. But let me start to what I think it's, so the right to training and skills and why that is so important. And I think the starting point here is that when we talk about the future of work, one of the biggest fears that people always have is to lose their jobs. We hear all the time in the media, in academic research and policy circles about new technologies and the extent to which they will automate some tasks that we do or automate our entire jobs. And there are some very scary estimates out there which suggest that half of our jobs could disappear over the next 10 to 20 years. I think these are probably exaggerated, but I also think we should not underplay the role of technology and automation in terms of change on the labor market. So at the OECD several years ago, we estimated the risk of automation. And what we did is we looked at people's jobs. We broke it up into different tasks because people do different tasks in their jobs. And then we looked at what share of those tasks could, with the technologies that are available, be automated. And so we came to an estimate on average across OECD countries of 14% of jobs being at high risk of automation. This is quite a significant number, 14% of jobs. On top of that, and I'll come back to that later, a third of jobs might not be entirely automated, but a very large share of the tasks might be automated. And so people will have to change on the job. And that's also relevant for the kind of charter that you are putting forward. So we estimated that 14% of jobs were at high risk of automation. One thing that we've recently done is, since these estimates are a few years old, we've looked at what's actually happened. So we tried to look at the jobs that were at highest risk of automation almost 10 years ago, and then compare those to the jobs that were at lowest risk of automation, and try to see, has this actually mattered for employment growth? And we actually do find that occupations that were at highest risk of automation have seen lower employment growth over the last 10 years or so. So this is significant that if there is a risk of automation, it clearly matters for employment growth. But what's also interesting is when we look at the aggregate level, at the national level, we don't find a relationship between automation risk and employment growth. So countries that were at high risk of automation have not necessarily seen lower employment growth. And this is very interesting. In fact, just before the COVID-19 crisis hit us, employment rates were at record levels in almost every single OECD country. So employment rates have been growing steadily over time, despite automation, despite technological change. Why is that? Well, there's a couple of reasons for this. On the one hand, we have, it's not because there's a risk of automation that automation actually happens. It needs to make business sense to invest in these technologies. Also, there are ethical reasons, moral reasons. I mean, often it's as a society that we decide about what jobs we want to automate and what jobs we don't want to automate. But also, technology creates jobs directly, and entirely new jobs related to the technology itself, like designing AI, artificial intelligence, and implementing it. But also because technology often makes us more productive, and productivity increases then leads to employment growth. Now, one thing that we have seen is that even though employment rates were at a record high prior to the crisis, the jobs that are being created are not the same as the jobs that are being destroyed. And this is really important because what we have seen is a very large drop. And this is really significant. I mean, we're not talking about a few percentage points. We're talking about double-digit changes here over a very short period of time in the number of jobs and the share of jobs for low-educated workers. And we've seen a very strong rise in this occupations and the jobs for high-skilled workers. So what we are seeing is that the demand for skills is changing very rapidly. We're seeing a strong decline in skills that need for manual tasks, skills that can be automated by robots, whereas cognitive skills, higher level end skills, there's been a very, very strong increase in those types of skills demanded in the labor market. And so this is where I think the charter and the right that we should give to people to training is really important. You mentioned digital skills in particular. Let me just give you one statistic from the OECD, and this is based on the survey of adult skills, where we asked adults to use a computer and to solve problems using the computer. And what we found is that in OECD countries, 1 in 10 adults cannot use a computer. On top of that, 4 in 10 adults, so that gets us to 50%, 4 in 10 adults, they can use a computer. I mean, they can use a mouse, they can use a browser, but if you actually ask them to solve a problem, to look for information, they fail the task. They struggle to do this. So 5 in 10, half of people in OECD countries have extremely poor digital skills. So skills is really important, but the right to union representation and collective bargaining is equally important. And why is that? It's because nothing is inevitable about the future. Yes, we have technology, we have new kind of inventions and everything, but there's nothing inevitable about the adoption of these technologies, nor is there anything inevitable about how these technologies are implemented in the workplace and what they mean for workers. And this is where social dialogue is so important, because it's together, governments and other stakeholders like employers and workers, who will decide what our future of work looks like. And what we also know is that union representation is declining in most OECD countries with the invention of new forms of work, but also just with the structural change that I've been talking about. For example, the very large decline in the share of jobs in manufacturing, where union representation used to be strong, to service sector jobs, where the jobs are more fragmented, less stable, and union representation is less strong. So I think making sure that workers have a voice and are able to say something about what happens to their future is really important too. And as I mentioned earlier, this is not just relevant to people who will lose their jobs, but as I said, 1 in 3 people will see significant change in their job, where more than 70% of tasks are likely to change as a result of automation. So having the right to have a say about this and what it means for your training and how you adapt on the job is really, really important. Now, one thing that is a new trend, I think, or a new technology that is really making significant inroads into the labor market at the moment is artificial intelligence. Everything I've said so far really applies to automating technologies as we used to know them. But artificial intelligence is slightly different to these automating technologies. And in particular, what's new about AI is that it can automate non-routine tasks. So what we've done at the OECD is we've looked at the kind of tasks that people do again, and we've looked at developments in artificial intelligence over the last 10 years. And what we found is that it's now actually high-skilled occupations that are most exposed to these new technologies in artificial intelligence. But, and this is very important, this is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, one thing that we have found is that if you have computer skills, if you use computers regularly in your work, then more exposure to artificial intelligence could actually be a good thing. It could actually increase the demand for people like you. So again, this reconfirms the importance of digital skills, the importance of training, and giving everyone a right to training. Now, so far, I have talked a lot about the impact of AI on jobs overall, on the quantity of jobs and on the nature of those jobs, and then the structural change. But of course, artificial intelligence will not only change the quantity of jobs, but will also change the nature of jobs. And to maybe make this more concrete, I will give an example, which is the use of artificial intelligence in recruitment. And so human resource departments in many companies are increasingly beginning to use tools based on artificial intelligence to help with the recruitment process. So whether it's about designing the kind of the job descriptions and the vacancies, or whether it's about reaching out to candidates. Even interviewing candidates can be done through artificial intelligence. The matching is sometimes done, the kind of selection procedure is sometimes done or can be done through artificial intelligence as well. And of course, many of these companies also use chatbots that are powered by AI to interact with potential applicants. So let's use this as a concrete example to illustrate some of the benefits, but also some of the dangers that we see ahead of us. So on the one hand, I think these new technologies could really improve the quality of the jobs of people who are involved in recruitment, because they used to spend hours sifting through CVs, doing very boring tasks that actually takes away from the other tasks that they have to do, which have more value added, the tasks where they really interact with some of the candidates, or the tasks where they have to recruit not just a kind of a standard profile, but more specialized profiles. The negotiations that they might have to enter to with candidates who are successful. So it could really improve the quality of their jobs, moving away from boring, routine tasks to more interesting tasks. From the candidate perspective, but also from the firm perspective, AI could really help also with improving the quality of the matches, which is really important, because the quality and the speed of matching in the labor market is very important, because it lowers unemployment, it increases productivity, it lowers turnover. So if artificial intelligence can help with this, it is a good thing for candidates, for the firm, but for society as a whole. Now, of course, AI could bring lots of benefits, and I think this is what we should focus on. But also there are very real risks. And of course, the Commission, you've already had a presentation on this. When we talk about the employment sphere, the risks are very serious, because we are talking about whether or not you can get a job or not, or whether or not you get fired. And of course, this has already been exemplified to an extreme extent, I think, in the platform economy, where people do gigs and they are recruited in an instant to do jobs that last a few minutes. And they could also be dismissed or fired, deactivated from platforms from 1 second to the next. And this is all decided by some kind of algorithm. Now let's go back to the recruitment example and say you're the candidate. I think it's really important that people have a right to know that artificial intelligence is being used in this recruitment process, that they are being judged by artificial intelligence. So for example, there are already AI tools that do video interviews and look at your facial features, at your voice, at your tone, to judge emotions, to judge. This is really important that people know about this, especially because AI, let's be fair about it, is often a black box. And whatever recommendation or decision comes out of an artificial intelligence tool, it's so important that a human in the end decides whether or not to take on that recommendation, that people have a right to a human being in control, that people have a right to an explanation about the decision, what data was this based on, and have a right to challenge this decision. This is particularly so because even though AI could help address bias, AI also risks increasing bias, and we all know this. We've all heard examples from Amazon and other companies that have used such tools, where we have found that AI, because it's based often on historical data, perpetrates this bias. And so you might not be facing a kind of a panel interview of middle-aged white men anymore, but the AI is based on all the decisions that that panel has taken in the past, so the bias is perpetrated. Then these tools also, one of the advantages is that they can collect data from all sorts of sources. So they go on LinkedIn, they go on other social media profiles, they collect all this unstructured data, bring it together and build a larger picture of you as a candidate, which is a great thing, because as a recruiter, I now have far more information on you than the traditional CV. But there are clearly issues about privacy and data protection as well, about the use of data beyond their original intended purpose. And finally, of course, all of this depends so much on the quality of the tools, and in particular, the quality of the data that's used in them, and what kind of measures are we putting in place to guarantee the quality of these data and tools. Now, just as a final word, because I realize I've just come to my 15 minutes, is we already have legislation in most of these areas, and this is a very good thing, especially in Europe. I think we are ahead on many other regions in the world. But the question is whether our legislation is still up to date with these latest developments. And I think this is where the challenge lies. It's not about inventing new things. It's not about talking about the ethics of AI. No, we have regulation already, but let's make sure that the regulation is up to scratch. And if I may just give one quick example, is one advantage of artificial intelligence tools is that it could actually help us fight bias, for example, in recruitment. But in order to do this, these tools often need access to variables like gender, like age, like ethnicity, which in some countries, it's illegal to make decisions on offering jobs based on these criteria. So is our anti-discrimination law still up to scratch? Do we need to change this so that we can actually fight bias and discrimination in the future? So this is just one example, but hopefully we can talk about more of these in the discussion that follows. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Broecke. It's been very interesting for sure. So basically, we should focus on the advantages of technology and how technology promotes the creation of new jobs and new tasks, rather than those that it's actually eliminating. And also how we must build on rights to really include everyone in these new opportunities that technologies bring along. So thank you so much. Now, it's now the turn of our second speaker, Mr. Albert Cañigueral. He is Director General on Open Data, Transparency and Collaboration at the Secretary of Open Government of the Generalitat de Catalunya. Mr. Cañigueral previously worked for over 10 years as a freelancer, being part of the We Share collective, exploring exploring the impact of technology on society, with a special focus on digital labor platforms and the futures of work. So he's the author of the book El trabajo ya no es lo que era, Work is not what it used to be. You can find it at Penguin Random House. He published it on 2020. And reports such as Worker Tech, How Technology Can Improve Emerging Jobs in Latin America and the Caribbean, by the Inter-American Development Bank. He published that in 2021. So I know also, Mr. Cañigueral, you've been a crucial part in the development of the Catalan Charter of Digital Rights and Responsibilities. So it's been such a pleasure, and we can't wait to hear you. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Galindo, Mr. Director. Yeah, my job changed 6 months ago when I joined the Generalitat de Catalunya. So I'm learning a new part of the world of work, but I think it's interesting. I spent 10 years as a freelancer because then I have a direct experience and direct perspective on some of the impacts of technology in the future of work. I have some slides to share. I will try to share my screen to support my presentation, and then I think we'll have material for debate. Someone can confirm that you can see correctly the slides. I think that's the case. So yeah, the first thing, and it was already mentioned a little bit by Mr. Broecke, it's important not to be deterministic about the future. So always use a plural, futures, with a final S, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But it's important that we observe and then we ask questions regarding digital rights or other aspects or worker rights regarding the impacts of these movements. In order to explore from a quite holistic perspective the potential futures of work, I decided to focus on 3 dimensions: work, workforce, and workplace, or workplaces, as we will see. So in all these 3 dimensions, technology is generating a huge impact. And then it's important that we observe what's going on, where we are coming from, where we are going, what are the opportunities, what are the risks. It's a pretty short presentation. So in the area of work, it was already very well presented by Mr. Broecke. In the past, we are coming from an era where the humans, the people, were the most important part on generating value, generating product, generating services. Now, through automation and AI, this assumption is challenged because we see that a lot of the areas where a human perspective or a human ability was important now are being taken over or complemented by AI and automation. So the narrative creates these two extremes, but it was already mentioned, and I like a lot the example of the recruiting. Where can we have the meeting point between the human capabilities, for example, and the capability of asking some questions with the mechanical and the strength of the AI and the robot. So this is the question we need to ask in that space is, what is the humanistic version of the work you are doing as it was presented in the recruitment process, instead of the tasks that are repetitive and like screening all the CVs? Why cannot be done by an AI? And then we actually focus on the human part of the interview and getting to know the candidates. Similar situation is always another famous example is with the radiologists, the people who are checking with the X-ray images if you might have cancer or not. It has already been proven that the success rate or the identification rate is better with AI in these for these needs. So we can support the work of radiologists with AI, being confident that this part of the job can be done with artificial intelligence. At the same time, the time we are saving on that space can be used to deal better with the need of a treatment, of dealing with the needs of a person who might have cancer. So this is, and that will happen in any aspect or any type of job, or even in our office job. How can we complement the tasks that are more repetitive, like organizing meetings or taking notes or analyzing some data? So, and we are in the process of automating these repetitive tasks. So the question is, what is this meeting point, this humanistic version of the job you might be doing now? So how can we complement it with AI and robots? On the workforce space, we're coming from an era, SEAT is a Spanish car manufacturer representing the traditional factory approach or the traditional Fordist approach to the workforce management. It means that it's going to be a long-term relationship. So I will develop my career inside the same company for many, many years, probably in a physical space with the same colleagues over the years. So it's kind of a old traditional approach to workforce relationship. That happened, or this model emerged in an era where the changes in technology were slow. So the company could more or less foresee for the next 15, 20 years that they are going to be developing a similar product because the industry is not going to be disrupted in such a fast pace as it happened now. And also in the past, the cost of coordination and the cost of transaction. So finding someone with the right skills at the right time, at the right place, hiring this person to develop a task was expensive, was difficult. So everything was very manual, or even screening CVs, let's say. So once you found someone, you wanted to have this person in your workforce for as long as possible, because it took a lot of time and energy to do that. On the other extreme of the spectrum, we have the platform, digital labor platform economy, European example like Deliveroo, where very, very few percentage of the employees are actually like traditional workforce, and probably 80%, 90% of the workforce are organized as external workforce, as freelancers. And technology is used to have them in a pool, readily available when the work needs to be performed, with all the reputation, all the ratings, and the tasks are assigned according to some of these ratings, or the availability, or the location. So we have a lot of data that will, the cost of coordination, the cost of transaction that I mentioned before, is going to zero with the use of artificial intelligence systems. So we have these two extremes. Again, what is important is to look at the point in the middle, let's say, or the middle ground, And here is where we find the Hollywood model for the workforce. Hollywood is because when you have an audiovisual production, it could be a TV series, or it could be a movie, it could be an advertising. If you go to any shooting, you will have a mix. You will have some people who will have a traditional relationship with the studio. They have a long-term relation with the studio as a workforce. And you will also find a number of freelancers who will be specialized on the needs for the specific movie, because it's not the same a horror movie, a cartoon movie, or like a romantic comedy movie. You will need different skill set for that. So, and for the rate of innovation and the rate of change in many industries, the companies will not have all the workforce they need inside as part of the traditional workforce. So they will need to find this middle ground between internal workforce and external workforce. And technology is easing, is facilitating this kind of new teams, the Hollywood team. And then we have like cartoonists like Tom Fishburne, who is illustrating that with his cartoon, saying, no, meet the rest of the team. Todd is an employee, Sally is a freelancer, Ed is a contractor, Regina is a gig worker, and Benny, probably it's retired and just does this as a hobby. So we'll need to get used that when we join a team, the type of labor relationship that people will have with the company, with the organization, is not going to be homogeneous. We are going to have a diversity. So as I said, imagine going into a recording studio, and there the people you will have around will have different work relationships, like in this cartoon. And we have a lot of literature going in this direction, from especially from the US media, on the future of work is to work for ecosystem, rethinking the on-demand workforce. So how many of the needs that you might have as a company can be really dealt on demand, or work without jobs. So we are going to have projects, work, but not traditional job relationships, or this work, or this book on the right, like The End of Jobs, the rise of on-demand workers and agile corporations, from the founder of one of these companies that is helping to organize all these mix of mixed workforce. So we've seen the workforce, and we are going to check also the workplace. Here, the two extremes are also quite obvious. On one side, we have the traditional factory floor office. We have this fetish of the office or the factory, especially the office. It seems that you could only do certain tasks when you were sitting in your desk. Now, with the pandemic situation, a lot of people were forced to work remotely, to work from home, in probably not ideal conditions. The first thing I like to explain is that this type of experience of remote work has been extreme. A lot of people will not have the location, even like the furniture to properly work from home. They will have to have kids or other members of the family working at the same time. So that has not been the positive experience for me of remote work. But we've demonstrated that a lot of things that we assume were mostly done at on-site, at the office, could be done remotely. Obviously, again, with the same schema, what I think is interesting is identifying third spaces, like co-working spaces or shared offices or hotels that are being prepared as a meeting place to work, where you can either work with other people who might be part of your company or part of other companies, if you are or even if you are a freelancer, but just with other freelancers. So instead of working from the office or working from home, this concept of working near home, what kind of interesting workspaces can we find? Sometimes they can be vertical workspaces, maybe for the people who are working in the tech space or people who are working on the design space. You can find specialized workspaces for that. And then the companies are creating their software solutions that kind of Airbnb for office space or for workspace. So the companies can identify what are the suitable workplaces for their employees, and they can just let them book kind of on demand where they want to work every day. One of the challenges that we will discuss later in terms of digital rights on this remote work is the surveillance. We've heard stories about remote, random screenshots to check if the people are working or not on the laptop while at home. So we have a lot of new challenges from the digital rights perspective on not going to the office, let's say, not traditional surveillance. And this is just the beginning. This remoteness is opening a wide space for debate. For example, all the digital nomads, as an extreme case of this of being a remote worker, people who are traveling and working in different spaces, or the telepresence. So even for the physical work that we assume in the past we had to be in the factory floor, in the warehouse, or as you see in the image in the middle, in the truck. There is this Swedish company that is testing what it would mean to be a remote driver for a truck. Can you imagine being a truck driver and actually having meal with your family? No. So this is the possibilities also enabled by some of the technology. And what are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And obviously, we could not finish a presentation like that without talking about the metaverse nowadays. Obviously, metaverse itself, it seems that it might be one workspace where people will be able to meet, to have this digital office on one side, and also to understand that we can actually create digital goods and sell digital goods and participate in these digital spaces, and that might be our workspace on the digital space. So this is something to be explored. So exactly as Mr. Broecke also said, it's not possible to say what is the future of work. So what are the futures in plural of work? I don't think I can say it, or nobody can actually say it. It's important to identify what are the changes in these dimensions of work, the workforce, the workplaces, and we see this three-dimensional space where we can locate some of these potential futures, and it's important that we develop critical questions. As a perspective on how to address that, it's important to see that a lot of things that used to be prevalent and mainstream in the past are declining, and technology is helping on this decline. And at the same time, a lot of the things that I mentioned are very niche, are very weird, are very strange. So they are not yet there as a mainstream. Institutions are not recognizing some of these trends. The laws are prepared for the no more space rather than for the not yet space. So we are in this interim, in this in-between, which is a very uncomfortable position to be at. And what I recommend is to focus on what we are going to do now, the questions, the Q&A. So as Peter Drucker used to say, the important and difficult job is never to find the right answers, is to find the right questions. And I think that after this presentation, we will have a lot of questions for debate. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Albert, for your great presentation. So we have to talk, we know that we have to talk about the futures of work because it's quite unclear or uncertain, but I would say that we have to talk about the futures of works because what we've learned from your presentation is that it's actually changing the relationship of not just like how workers relate to the company, but also in terms of the workplace and the workspaces and how everything is so much changing, the tasks that we need to do. So let's focus on the futures of works. And so thank you so much for your inspiring presentation. Now it's time for the conversation. I know that there's been some questions from the audience, but first I would like to invite Mr. Albert Royo to take it from here. Mr. Royo is a political scientist who has always been involved in the fields of public affairs, government communications, and international relations. He's mainly focused on civic tech, public diplomacy, and EU affairs. And he's behind the organization of this series of live sessions on digital rights and responsibilities. Thank you so much, Albert, for having such great panelists and conversations and this hot debate on digital rights, and for putting together these sessions, which contribute so much to the global debate on digital rights and to also position our work that we're doing from Catalonia. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you so much. And thank you to the two speakers. It's been a very interesting discussion. I would start by letting Stijn react to Albert's presentation, because I'm sure that he's got many comments on his presentation. We have already received a couple of questions. I'm sure we're going to have more. So we have like 15 minutes for this Q&A. Stijn, please, the floor is yours.
No, I mean, I have not much to say. I totally agree with what Albert has been said. And we discussed this prior to the presentation, is that we, what we presented is very complimentary, and we only had 15 minutes each. And many of the things that Albert has said are things that we are also working on at the OECD and things that I would support. The nature of work is changing, but I think what is really important, and in fact, that will be some of my answers to some of the questions that I've already seen appearing in the chat. It is, again, coming to this point that we have multiple futures ahead of us, and none of these are inevitable. We really have to choose the future we want. Our sister organization, the International Labour Organization, has said, the ILO has said this in their centenary event on future work, and I really like this. Is that it's the future of work we want. So I mean, but that also comes down to one important point, and perhaps that's something where I do want to react to the presentation by Albert. It's also on the forms of work. So one thing that I do want to mention, and I guess it comes back to the point of rights, is that we do want flexibility, as long as it is the right kind of flexibility. So I think we want people to have some say about where they work, about when they work, so that they have a greater work-life balance. They can combine things. Some people, like me, are more productive in the morning, but I know other people are more productive in the evening. So within my team at the OECD, I really encourage people very strongly to decide for themselves when they want to work, also where they want to work. We know we live in a world now, thanks to COVID, where working from home has become more normal. And again, some people like it, other people don't. And it's really important that we work with this diversity amongst our workforce and accept that. And I think it's also very important that managers learn about this. But so this is all good flexibility. What I want to warn against is the wrong type of flexibility, because we have seen in some countries a rise in forms of work which, in my opinion, sometimes have the wrong type of flexibility. So what do I mean by this? It's the kind of flexibility where all the risks are shifted onto the shoulders of workers, so that employers and firms no longer have these responsibilities. So they remove their responsibilities in terms of employment regulation, whether it's minimum wages or employment protection legislation. They avoid minimum wage legislation. They avoid all sorts of rights and benefits that we have built up over time, because workers are often in a precarious position. And so shift these new forms of work that shift those kind of risks onto the shoulder of workers is something that I'm very concerned about. And it's something that deteriorates the quality of work of some individuals, and in particular individuals who in the past have already had a very weak position in the labor market. And again, coming back to my first point, this is not inevitable. This increases in precarious forms of work happens in some countries, it doesn't happen in other countries. And so let's make sure that we have the right type of flexibility. Let's make sure that we have good flexibility and not bad flexibility. So that's just my reaction to the presentation, but I'm sure that I saw Albert nodding. I'm sure that he doesn't disagree with me. I don't know.
This is a very good point, Stijn. We have already received 2 or 3 questions. There's one from Marichey, a question to both regarding jobs automation. What is the importance of fostering the most human skills from a very young age, specifically talking about music or creativity in general? There's another one coming from Pep Oliveras. Sam Altman, chief executive of OpenAI, recently said that all jobs will improve substantially in the coming years with virtual assistants who will help with all kinds of work, but those jobs that are repetitive and predictable tasks will be directly replaced by AI. What do you think about that? That's something that you have, in a way, discussed. And there is still another question to both of you, what do you think it would be the role of governments and policymakers to address these new features, taking into account that jobs, but also its intermediation by AI systems could be located in geographical areas where regulation can be different as ours here in Europe? That's something which is also very timely. Albert, would you like to react? At least to some of these questions, please.
Yeah. It's a very, very wide scope of questions. Now, regarding probably the Michelle's question regarding the skills. Yeah, I think we also have this idea that we go through an educational phase of 20 years. We acquire a set of skills that will last for 40, 45 years during our work life, and then we retire. We still have these 3 phases mentality, even from a policy perspective. And I think it's clear that through this, the pace of change, we need to address this famous long life learning approach, where we are going to keep learning. So I would say that the most important skill to keep yourself in the labor market is to keep learning. And learning also implies unlearning, forgetting or changing some of your habits. So, and obviously here, like creativity skills, like music, creativity, also are the human part of that. And I would say, and I think Mr. Broecke also said during his presentation, the combination, being able, so one critical skill is how you are able to combine your skills with machines, with artificial intelligence. How can that's going to be a critical one. And regarding the last one on the regulation, on the government, what I explained at the very end of the presentation between the no yet and no more, we have still a public policy and a system of protections and a way of regulating work, very much addressing the tailorist way of working, which meant going for a long-term relationship, physical space. And this is why, for example, Mr. Broecke also mentioned that a lot of the new forms of work are underprotected. So we need to have the same level of rights and protection that we have for the traditional employment for everybody. And then we can address some of the bad flexibility that he also identified from this aspect, at the same time that we need to prevent this bad flexibility. I completely agree. And especially we still think very much an approach of the nation state as the space where we need to regulate work. And I was myself a digital nomad for a couple of months this year, earlier last year. And then you see yourself in a completely different position where really countries and regulations and so on, you see it doesn't make any sense when you are in this position. So we need to rethink a little bit that space from beyond the nation state. Yeah.
That's a good point. Steve, maybe you want to complement. Let me also put your question. And right now I'm reading this book, Racing 2020s, The Raging 2020s of Alex Ross, which is a very interesting book. Alex Ross is the author of The Industries of the Future. And he was also senior advisor for innovation. And he was senior advisor for innovation to the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. And here he's proposing a new contract, a new social contract. And he's especially developing the idea that trade unions need to somehow evolve with the goal to somehow represent this new interest by the workforce, by workers. What do you think about this? What do you think the role of trade unions should be and how trade unions should evolve in the future? Because affiliation is quite low in many countries, especially in the States, but also in many countries here in Europe. And I guess that in a way, trade unions should somehow reinvent themselves in order to at least to represent all these new workers types. Stijn.
A lot of extremely interesting questions. On skills, very quickly, I totally agree with what Albert said. I just want to add something interesting, is that computers can already make music. AI is beginning to write books, and so being creative. I guess I once heard, I don't totally agree with this point, and I can't remember who said this, but I once heard somebody say that we shouldn't focus on the skills that can be automated, but we should focus on the skills that we don't want to be automated. So it comes back to that element of choice. Do we want a computer to write books for us? Do we want a computer to play music for us? That's not something that we appreciate as human beings, I think. So again, it comes back to some element to a choice, but not only. I do think there are some skills that are still very difficult for AI to automate. And I do think that our education system sometimes lag behind in terms of what kind of skills we teach our children. On the quality of jobs, I am not so sure about this point. So my dream is that we will have robots and algorithms and artificial intelligence that will automate my job, and I can just sit back and read poetry and move to a country and sit in the sun, and I just get my robots to work for me, and I just get my paycheck at the end of the month, and everything is great. That is my dream. In theory, this could happen, and everyone could have their own robots working for them. I think the danger is that in practice, there are a lot of inequalities. And what will happen is that some people's jobs can be automated much more than others. And the other thing that will happen is that people who own these robots are not the same as the people, whose jobs get automated. And I think this is where the risk lies, is that there's huge inequalities in who will benefit and who will lose out from technologies. And I think that this is where government has a really important role to play in terms of skills, in terms of helping people transition to new jobs, in terms of making sure that the losers are compensated in some way and can also benefit from the opportunities that arise. And this is also, Albert, this goes back to your question about the role of unions. It's not an easy story, right? I mean, you mentioned the United States. Unionization in the United States is very low, but the reason for that is regulation, is that in the United States, it's very difficult to unionize and represent workers. Regulation has a very big role to play, and over time, we have seen this, that part of the decline in unionization in some countries is due to changes in regulations and policies. But I also agree that unions cannot just blame others for the decline in unionization. They also need to take on some of the responsibilities. And there are plenty of examples of unions out there who are being proactive, who are reinventing themselves, who are thinking about new ways of representing workers, giving them voice and reaching out to them. My colleagues, I have some colleagues at the OECD who specifically look at this, and I think they've put out some publications looking into this aspect. So I can point you to those if that would be helpful.
Yeah, on this point of the trade unions, something we discovered while doing some research also, it seems that one potential direction is to be more like a guild from the medieval guilds, where you have actually the protection of a sector more than transversal and global unions. So we need both. We need traditional global unions to defend the rights of the global workforce, the complete workforce. But then we've also identified that a little bit more niche sectorial guild-like approach, where you actually have services which are catering a specific collective, and technology helps. You can provide more personalized and customized services through a homogeneous collective in new ways. And in that respect, I also share here on the chat, I recommend the work of the White Knot Labs. It's one of the persons who are exploring this futures of trade unions in that respect. So I think that's also interesting to see. But yeah, there is union tech, a lot of interesting. But I think we need this kind of collective representation of the workers, and we need to find in these futures of works what is the best way to represent and to defend the rights of these workers. But I think it's badly needed.
Good noted. We have a final question, the last question that we've got here in the chat from Ricardo Benitez. The question for you, Albert. The workplace is already a very flexible concept, I would say continuous. So we should not think of a co-working space, the office of the company or home, but all at once, combined according to the need and any other. What do you think about this, Albert, about this statement?
I see. I'm not sure I have very good connection now. Oops.
Yeah, we hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I will also paste here on the chat, for example, this is exactly on what Mr. Benitez is asking. This is a startup from it called ZT with a Z, ZT Hub. which is the type of software that I mentioned before, which is actually connecting for an employee of a corporation. You can decide if you're going to go to work at the traditional office, and you have probably a system of hot desking where you are going to book your space for the day or for the week. It will also link hotels, which will have rooms, and they have the wood heating system and the security and the IT facilities, and they have been checked. You also can work from, again, co-working spaces near home. One of the things we discovered also during the COVID is people, they do not dislike to go to the office and meet with their colleagues. What they dislike is the commute. So how can we actually meet with other people? Because I think it's I prefer to work with the people, and very often I go to co-working spaces. But reduce the commuting. And then we have solutions like this example of City Hub is one of them, but I'm sure there are more, which facilitate in a coherent way to have access to a number of spaces to work or workspaces.
Yeah, that's a good point. I usually use Work From. Welcome to Work From. Here you have it. It's a very useful app offering you the places where you have, access to Wi-Fi, high-speed internet, and perfect place to work, which may not be a proper office, but a cafe or a restaurant or somewhere else. Very good. Thank you so much to the two speakers. It's been very interesting. And now I pass the floor to the Director General to wrap up and say bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Albert, and thank you. Well, it's been a very, very interesting conversation and inspiring, I would say. First, I would like to have some points that have struck me most from what Mr. Stijn Broecke has said. I think that the main takeaway is that people fear losing their jobs because of technology. Technology is changing, right? Jobs, tasks, etc. But the OECD has found out that there is no link between the jobs that are at risk of automation and the growth of jobs, which are different of those that are being destroyed. So we must focus on technology and on those jobs that are being created, on how productivity is also growing and also generating growth and welfare and jobs. So we must focus on how to promote that we have the talent and the skills to really meet this new demand for jobs. So here I would like to say that the importance of the right to training, the right to skills, the right to long life learning is very important. And that brings me to the fact that we need to find a new social dialogue between the workers, the companies, the governments, and what Mr. Royo was also sharing with us, like a new social contract where the unions have also a very important role to play. And going to Mr. Albert Canigaral's presentation, as I said, the futures of work is quite unclear, but we need to focus on the benefits that this is promoting. So even for tasks, with the example of medical diagnosis using AI, or with the workplace. And I loved it that he said that we don't want to work from home, we don't want to work from the office, but we like working near home, which brings a lot of concepts all together. And I'm also in charge of the urban agenda for Catalonia, which links to the SDGs and to how to build a better environment for all in cities and also in rural areas. So working near home is directly related to my welfare as a citizen and on how I relate to my workplace and to my environment, to my neighborhood. So, so I'd like to say I'm very pleased to see that we are doing things right from the government of Catalonia. We are believers. We are convinced that digital is the future, that technology brings prosperity, both in terms of economic prosperity and in terms of social prosperity, but we have a huge endeavor, and I think this is shared with all the actors from our society, to protect the rights of the workers, of the new talent that is required to promote that everyone can fulfill these skills and these requirements. And also, I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of the education system and how we prepare our future generations. So thank you so much again. Thank you, Mr. Stijn Broecke, for being here today, for sharing your experience with us. Thank you, Mr. Albert Cañigueral. Thank you, Albert Royo. Thank you, Arnau Serra, who has been there putting all this together. And thanks everyone for joining us today. And I hope you have a very good day.